Leaked documents provide new evidence of the Chinese Communist Party's cover-up of the CCP virus in Wuhan. Who is patient zero? A building under construction in South China suddenly collapsed, killing 7. All the steel pipe scaffolding from top to bottom came crashing down. President Trump said he would bring American soldiers home so they'd be prepared for potential battles with other countries, including China. 2 European companies dropped Chinese telecom giant Huawei from their 5G networks. This is related to NATO and the EU headquarters in Brussels. And Indian media congratulated Taiwan for their National Day. The Chinese Communist regime boosted India's support for the island by telling Indian media what to do and what not to do. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. First, we take a look at another type of virus outbreak. This time in China's Shanxi University of Finance and Economics. Around 100 male college students there suddenly started reporting severe symptoms this week. Despite reports of widespread poisoning, the university didn't initially provide students with information about the incident. On Thursday evening, it briefly confirmed a norovirus infection outbreak. The short announcement was posted on its official Weibo account, but the social media post didn't provide any detailed information. Norovirus is highly contagious and can infect people of all ages. Symptoms include vomiting and diarrhea. One college student who asked to remain anonymous told us almost all students living on the 6th floor of one of the university's dorms began showing symptoms on Tuesday. All classes have been suspended since Wednesday. Students are now under lockdown inside their dorms. The university arranged for food delivery, but students are required to clean and disinfect their own living spaces. The student we spoke to estimated that about 100 students had been infected and quarantined. But the university hasn't disclosed the official figure. He also revealed that infected students are allowed to visit the school clinic for medical treatment, but their test results haven't been disclosed to them. He explained that now no one trusts university officials anymore. He added that the schools shouldn't keep the students in the dark. We found that some students were afraid of talking to media about the incident for fear of possible retaliation from the university. The university has yet to comment publicly. Now we look to new evidence of the Chinese Communist Party's or CCP's cover-up of the virus in China. Internal documents from Chinese hospitals we obtained show that the first case likely appeared in China 3 months before the virus was formally announced. Officially, the first case appeared in Wuhan on the last day of 2019. But one hospital in the city reported a case of severe pneumonia back in September to Chinese authorities. Other hospitals reported dozens of similar cases between September and December. These reports were made due to a request from China's National Investigation Team in February. From October 1st to December 10, 2019, hospitals in Wuhan's urban areas were asked to provide data on fewer cases and patients with symptoms similar to what we now know as the CCP virus. Information on deaths related to pneumonia from unknown causes was also requested. We obtained reports from 8 hospitals, totaling 40 cases. Jiang'an Hospital reported 10 patients with similar X-ray results to those diagnosed with the CCP virus. 7 of them showed symptoms in October of last year. The earliest case on the list came from the end of September. Wuhan's 6th hospital reported 5 deaths. All of them had showed symptoms like difficulty in breathing, fever, coughing, and lung infections. One of them died in November and the other 4 in December. 2 of them died just days after starting to show symptoms, indicating the disease developed quickly. These reports were submitted to Chinese authorities in February, but in media reports, public speeches, and documents from Chinese authorities, there was no word whatsoever about them. Details about the National Investigation Team's probe are still unknown. Many countries and organizations outside China have been trying to enter China to independently investigate. But none have received permission from Beijing, and even if they were permitted, it remains to be seen whether they would be allowed to see all information, data, and records they request. Now we look into a construction site accident in southern China. A building under construction in Guangdong province suddenly collapsed on Thursday, killing 7 and injuring 2 others.
According to local media, a huge collapse at a construction site about midday on Thursday led to 7 deaths in Shenwei City, Guangdong province. When workers were pouring cement on the roof of a 5-story building, the framework support for cement suddenly collapsed, causing 9 casualties. Among them, 7 people died and 2 were injured. The casualty figures are still being updated. Photos from the site show the support framework collapsed in a large area. The steel pipe scaffolding from top to bottom crashed down. The construction site had since been blocked by the police. This year, there have been reports of accidents on construction sites, building collapses, and various major traffic accidents throughout China. During the Golden Week National Day holiday in October, 3 serious traffic accidents occurred in North China, causing at least 26 deaths and 19 injuries. Prior to this, at the end of August, a large restaurant in central China's Shanxi province suddenly collapsed. Local media reported 13 deaths. NTD News.
And now an update on the 12 Hong Kong activists arrested by Chinese authorities at sea. Relatives of the detainees on Thursday expressed their suspicion that Hong Kong authorities helped China to lay a trap for these 12 people in order to hand them over to mainland China.
Relatives of the 12 Hong Kongers arrested by Chinese authorities at sea, along with some activists from the city, accused the Hong Kong government of lying over the circumstances surrounding their capture. The 12 are being held in the southern Chinese city of Shenzhen. 6 weeks ago, the Chinese Communist regime intercepted their boat and accused them of illegal border crossing. The border between mainland China and Hong Kong still remains, even though Beijing took over Hong Kong over 20 years ago. It's mainly to prevent Chinese citizens from entering Hong Kong illegally. When the 12 were arrested, they were on their way to Taiwan and entered Chinese waters. They are also accused of crimes tied to anti-government protests in Hong Kong last year. China's foreign ministry has called them separatists, indicating they promoted independence for Hong Kong. Their families protested outside Hong Kong Flying Service headquarters on Thursday. They said they had obtained the flight path of a Hong Kong government plane, showing it was surveying the boat the 12 were in. This led them to suspect local authorities helped Chinese officials. Hong Kong police denied any involvement in the detainment, but democracy activist Joshua Wong suspects that the Chinese Security Bureau and Hong Kong Government Flying Service laid a trap for these 12 people.
What it means is that when the Government Flying Service helicopter operation started at 4:10 a.m. as part of a law enforcement operation, it was clearly on police orders. And while Hong Kong police said that they had no involvement in the operation, this doesn't appear credible.
The father of an 18-year-old detainee, Chung Se-ho, held up a placard outside the Government Flying Service headquarters that read, "Government lied. Return my son back to me."
The Hong Kong government, or the Chinese government, how can they have hidden them away for 47 days with no news for us?
The detainees have been denied access to independent lawyers and are only allowed to have designated lawyers from Chinese authorities. More than a dozen police stood guard as the relatives staged a peaceful protest, with live television footage showing some being stopped and searched by officers. NTD News.
A protest using a paintbrush. NTD spoke with an activist known for his large-scale paintings that call for freedom in Hong Kong. His artwork would often spring up on the region's colorful Lenin walls. Our UK correspondent Jane Wirral has the details.
This 33-foot artwork has a message of freedom.
I think it is the responsibility of every Hong Konger to fight for freedom and protect Hong Kong, and we cannot back down out of fear.
In 2019, thousands of post-its with handwritten notes sprung up spontaneously in Hong Kong's subways, tunnels and shops. This creative way of protesting is a take on the Lenin Wall, first started in Eastern Europe in 1980. The Lenin Wall in Prague is a symbol of artistic resistance against the former communist regime. Among Hong Kong's Lenin Walls were these paintings by Yuan. They look like posters but are actually hand-painted. Many have the popular protest slogan, "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Times," words that are now banned in Hong Kong following the passing of the National Security Law. Authorities say this slogan is subversive and anyone using it risks prosecution. Yellow Shops is the name given to shops that support the pro-democracy movement. They returned his paintings.
I originally planned to hang my paintings up in yellow shops, but because of the implementation of the national security law, the shops were unable to put them up and return them to me. I had to make a decision between either throwing my paintings out or keeping them. I chose to protect these paintings.
The new national security law combined with online threats made him leave Hong Kong. In spring, a pro-Chinese Communist Party paper published articles saying the Lenin Wall painter is a sex offender, accusations Yuan says are ridiculous. He said people he didn't know accused the shop owners that hung up his artwork of supporting a criminal.
At its peak, I received over 100 messages a day. You are already the enemy of the people. Don't go out on the street. You will be dealt with us as soon as you go out on the street.
Since arriving in the UK, he painted this piece to mark the one-year anniversary of the August 31st metro station attack, when Hong Kong police stormed subway stations in an attempt to arrest protesters, injuring unarmed passengers. The painting includes some of Hong Kong's popular protest slogans in Japanese.
This is a Japanese translation of the slogan, "Liberate Hong Kong, revolution of our times." It was because this phrase might be circulated in Hong Kong, and I don't want people to violate the national security law because of this. Therefore, I wanted to express the sentence in Japanese.
It also shows scenes of umbrellas and tear gas.
This half year, from June to December 2019, the police used 15,927 rounds of tear gas to tackle the young people in Hong Kong. And these young people could only use umbrellas to defend themselves from the toxic smoke of tear gas. Part of it depicts the students at the Chinese University of Hong Kong fighting against the Chinese Communist Party. The dragon, in fact, represents the CCP. Every single little piece of paper represents a unique message, and each has their own story.
He wants to create a Lenin Wall in the UK.
My wish is to find a wall that's 4 or 5 stories tall, and to draw on it something that's representative of the fight. I hope a wall like that can be set up in the UK.
As Hong Kong is increasingly drawn into Beijing's orbit, he's continuing to fight for Hong Kong's freedoms from the UK with a paintbrush. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
Investigations into the Black Lives Matter organization has revealed links to groups that are pro-communist China. In an interview with the host of Crossroads, an expert on these groups broke down this red network that he says is behind the riots that followed the death of George Floyd.
A network of groups that are pro-communist China are behind most of the U.S. riots that followed the death of George Floyd. That's according to investigative journalist and Epoch Times contributor Trevor Loudon, an expert on radical left Marxist movements and their influence on mainstream politics. In an interview with the host of Crossroads, he went over this red network that's tied to the founders of the Black Lives Matter organization.
Well, most of the rioting is actually being organized by 2 pro-Chinese communist parties, the Freedom Road Socialist Organization based out of Minneapolis, and Liberation Road, which is the parent body of Black Lives Matter, which is based in the Bay Area and has very close ties to the Chinese consulate there and the Chinese Progressive Association. So you've really got to think this is basically a Chinese-directed movement.
According to its website, the Freedom Road Socialist Organization is a Marxist pro-China group. Loudon says they're in close contact with the Chinese Communist Party and follows its propaganda. The journalist produced a video that includes a podcast showing Jess Sundin, a member of this organization, admitting that she was the main organizer of the riots in Minneapolis, and the joy she felt when she saw a police precinct burned down. Then there's Liberation Road, which Loudon says several of its supporters live in China and support the CCP line.
So Liberation Road is the parent body of Black Lives Matter. Liberation Road are the people who burnt Ferguson, Missouri to the ground in 2014. And Liberation Road, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi The three founders of Black Lives Matter are all directly affiliated to Liberation Road.
Loudon says this Maoist communist group controls the Chinese Progressive Association in Boston and San Francisco. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
Now we turn to President Trump's latest remarks on China. In an interview with Fox News this Thursday, President Trump said he wants to bring U.S. military home by the end of this year. He added the move is to prevent troops from wearing out in case they are needed for fights against other countries, including China.
And we have to be always prepared for China and Russia and these other places. We have to be prepared, maybe North Korea.
Trump also said that if he wins the second term, he would impose tariffs on China. He claimed China bought its largest order of U.S. corn and soybeans in history to keep him happy.
Because they know that I'm a hair trigger when it comes to them, and I'm sick of them. Everything that we have that COVID, the China virus because of them.
He also blamed the Chinese regime for job losses in the states due to the pandemic. Now an update about European companies dropping Chinese telecom giant Huawei and choosing other suppliers to build their 5G networks. Two major carriers in Belgium have picked Nokia to supply key telecom equipment. And this is related to NATO and the EU headquarters.
Proximus and Orange are among the first European companies to drop Huawei. Washington has been pressuring European operators for months, saying Huawei equipment could be used by Beijing for spying. The Belgian capital, Brussels, is home to NATO and the EU headquarters. That makes it a particular concern for U.S. intelligence agencies. Danish telecom consultant John Strand said, quote, Belgium has been 100% reliant on Chinese vendors for its radio networks, and people working at NATO and the EU were making mobile phone calls on these networks. Strand says the operators are sending a signal that it's important to have access to safe networks. Washington welcomed the decision. Huawei denies the allegations, but says it's fair competition. It's supplied equipment in Belgium for more than a decade. Telenet is now the only Belgian carrier that hasn't decided which company to go with for 5G, a decision it says could come early next year. Telenet relies on another Chinese company, ZTE, for equipment. EU members have been stepping up scrutiny of high-risk vendors. Analysts say other European carriers will likely follow suit. The shift away from Huawei has mainly benefited Nokia and Ericsson.
Now we turn to Beijing's 2022 Winter Olympics. An Australian senator is urging his government to boycott China's Winter Olympics over Beijing's human rights abuses toward the Uyghur ethnic group. Independent Senator Rick Patrick argues sports is closely linked to politics, and the communist regime could use sports to boost their global prestige. In a statement published this Thursday, he said athletes should not be asked to compete at an event that will promote a communist government engaged in genocide. But Australia's sports minister signals the government wouldn't pressure its athletes to boycott. Minister Richard Colbeck said it's not the government that's responsible for sending athletes to the Games. Australia's federal parliament will soon debate whether the government should support Australia's backing out of the 2022 Games. Now we turn to India, where support for Taiwan is surging. It's all thanks to a recent threat made by the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. As the National Day holiday in Taiwan approaches, Indian newspapers, The Statesman and Indian Express printed a full-page celebration advertisement earlier this week. Other Indian media also published special reports on Taiwan in celebration. But not long after, the Chinese embassy in New Delhi warned the media outlets in an email not to violate the One China policy. It advised them not to use terms like president to describe Tsai Ing-wen, the head of Taiwan. It also discouraged mentioning the term Republic of China, the formal name of Taiwan. The embassy's demands have since raised concerns. In a recent Twitter post, an Indian journalist questioned whether China's statement should be deemed an indirect threat to India. According to Economic Times, the editor of a defense and security website said the Chinese government behaves like a street goon, not like an aspiring superpower. It threatens us. The comment came after receiving the email from the Chinese embassy. Some Indian citizens are responding to the threat, saying their country is not afraid of the CCP. Many others have simply ignored the embassy's threat. Instead, they are celebrating and supporting Taiwan with the hashtag Taiwan National Day. Some netizens have expressed well wishes for Taiwan's democracy and freedom. Others have voiced wishes for Taiwan-Indian cooperation to promote regional peace, stability, and prosperity. And one user who replied said they can't wait to see a new China without the CCP. Beijing's recent military aggression in the Taiwan Strait is raising concerns. Some say it could lead to a full-blown war. We sat down with the Epoch Times China editor Annie Wu to find out more. Welcome back, Annie. Great to have you on the show.
Great to be here again.
So recently there's been an increase in Chinese military aggression in the Taiwan Strait. So how likely is this to lead to conflict, and could they actually succeed?
Yes, this is one of the big questions now that the Chinese military has recently conducted more exercises near Taiwan, essentially an act of intimidation. So most experts believe that if the Chinese regime were to invade Taiwan, they would bring their military and conduct an amphibious attack, meaning naval ships will come on shore onto Taiwan shores and attack from there. There's also the possibility of Air Force aggression.
And so this threat isn't a new one. So China has been threatening to take Taiwan back by force for at least 7 decades. So why the sudden increase in hostility now?
Yes, the increase in hostility, experts have said, is likely due to the fact that the United States has recently fostered closer ties with Taiwan. Most notably, in recent months, 2 high-level officials from the United States administration has visited Taiwan and conducted exchanges. This is pretty unprecedented in the history of relations since the United States broke formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan. So the Chinese sees it as a threat to their claim of sovereignty over Taiwan.
So some people have been suggesting that the U.S. could intervene on behalf of Taiwan if China attacks. But one issue is the policy the U.S. has of strategic ambiguity. So what does this mean?
Yes, so for decades, the United States has adopted this policy to not directly address whether or not the United States would intervene militarily in the event of a Chinese attack on Taiwan. And this has, in a sense, acted as deterrence from the Chinese regime deciding to attack Taiwan, because the United States may or may not intervene. So the Chinese regime sees it as kind of like a peaceful barrier, right? As long as you don't intervene, I don't intervene. But in recent weeks, due to the increase in Chinese aggression, some experts say that the United States maybe should be more clear about whether or not it would intervene. And in that event, then the Chinese regime would feel threatened if the United States decides to say very clearly that they will assist Taiwan, and that instead would act as deterrence.
Experts calling on the U.S. to make a clear stand on whether or not they will intervene.
So the president of the Council on Foreign Relations actually wrote about this in a recent article that he penned for the Foreign Affairs magazine. He said that if the United States states clearly its intention to defend Taiwan, then the Chinese regime would feel, in a sense, threatened, and they wouldn't want to risk it all in order to invade Taiwan.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Annie. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Now we will answer a question from some viewers who asked us why we call the coronavirus CCP virus. CCP virus is short for the Chinese Communist Party virus. The name is to hold the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, accountable, as its cover-up and mishandling of the outbreak in Wuhan allowed the virus to become a pandemic. It infected millions of people around the globe, including President Trump. Back in China, the communist officials knew about the virus at least in early December, but hid the information for weeks. Not only that, they also punished doctors who tried to warn others, including Dr. Li Wenliang. Li later contracted the virus and died. The Chinese regime also arrested citizen journalists covering the outbreak and shut down the Shanghai lab that published the world's first genome sequence of the virus. The genome sequence is crucial for developing testing kits for the virus. And it's not just about the cover-up. The Chinese regime later tried to shift the blame, claiming the virus originated from the United States and Italy. Calling the virus CCP virus reminds people of its true source. It also makes a clear distinction between the Chinese communist regime and the Chinese people, who also are victims of the regime's cover-up. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time.